Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for your attendance today at the TechKnow Invest Roadshow webinar series, where we will hear from and talk to a range of technology companies listed or looking to list on the ASX. Each presenter has a 10-minute slot to give their presentation, and you will see at the bottom the Q&A function. You can use that to ask questions of the presenters, and I will moderate those at the end of their presentation. If you do miss part of the webinar series, don't stress too much. We are recording these sessions and we are able to share those with you early next week. Our first presentation will be from Liron Fendel, CEO of Unlisted Nutritional Growth Solutions. Liron, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, so my name is Liron, and I'm going to speak to you today about Nutritional Growth Solutions, which is a junior nutritional milk formula business. So let me just share my my screen. David, I see it says host disabled my screen sharing, so maybe you can pull out my presentation.
Liron, please proceed. I've just fixed that for you.
Okay, so here you can see our existing line of products that we are currently selling throughout the United States, which is called Healthy Height. And height is a major concern for children and parents around the world. This is why the experts at Schneider Children's Medical Center of Israel created Nutritional Growth Solutions because they identified that children were not growing to their full potential due to the lack of key nutrients. In terms of some investor highlights for Nutritional Growth Solutions, the company has sold its licensing rights of Healthy Height in India to GlaxoSmithKline, who then sold the business to Unilever. And they are now selling it across India in many health food stores and pharmacies under their Horlicks brand. And they paid for the right to sell it in India, £7 million, which is roughly 14 million Australian dollars. And this is why the company never raised any money in equity. And this is how the company has been funded to date. Following this transaction, NGS continued its clinical studies and also created a US company, which is now selling Healthy Height throughout the United States, selling only direct, so online sales of Healthy Height in the United States. In addition to that, we are now entering the Chinese market with a new distribution agreement with the Chinese state-owned entity called Hi Ho Baby, which has already placed their first purchase order earlier this year. One thing that I think really differentiates our company from others is that all of our products are clinically tested and clinically proven. So because we are coming from a pediatric hospital, this gives us access to being able to perform clinical studies in relatively low cost. And these clinical studies then make it possible for us to put claims on our products and to write patents. And not to mention, just knowing that we're selling products that actually help. We also have some new upcoming studies coming up in 2020 and 2021. And another achievement that we just recently got is that Healthy Height is now coded for insurance in the United States. And it is now eligible for insurance coverage with the submission of a letter of medical necessity. This is especially important for us now when experts say that some of the American market may be headed towards some sort of a recession, and some of the families will not have as much income as they used to. So being able to get reimbursement from the insurance will really help many families to continue and buy Healthy Height even during this time. And I do want to mention that NGS sales are not adversely affected by the COVID-19 situation. In fact, the grocery and supplement categories have experienced increased demand in the US, especially for e-commerce businesses. Our supply chain is stable, and our online sales in the US for Q1 2020 are the highest we have seen to date. While on the subject of our clinical studies, so the experts at Schneider have spent over 20 years researching the interaction between nutrition and growth, and they have published dozens of articles about this subject until they came up with the specific formulation of Healthy Height. And Healthy Height is a milk formula for children who are over 3 years old. And it's based on milk with added vitamins and minerals and some amino acids as well. We took Healthy Height to a clinical study, and this is a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. This is the kind of studies they do in the pharma industry. And we saw that the children who had Healthy Height grew on average about 25% higher, taller than the children on the control group during one year. So, for example, when the children on the control group grew about 6 centimeters per year, the children in the Healthy Height group grew 7.2 to 7.5 centimeters per year, which is awesome because Healthy Height is just food. It's not growth hormone. It's not a drug. It's just a milk formula, but one that is tailored for this specific need. And here you can see what Healthy Height looks like now in the US. So this is basically shake mix, powder to be mixed with water or milk. We saw a really nice increase in sales since we launched the product in April 2018. So when we just launched it in April 2018, and that first year we did about 500,000 US in sales. Then for 2019, we did 1.2 million US in sales. And now for the first quarter of 2020, we're already at 500,000 US in sales for that first quarter. So really a nice increase in sales. And I think what's interesting is that we have not increased our marketing spend over these months. So all of the growth is organic. And here I think you can see kind of where it's coming from. So when we just started, we acquired each customer for $50 US. Now we are acquiring our customers for $20 US. The average lifetime sales per each customer is over $100. So we're basically buying $100 of sales for $20. And if we are looking at our core customers, so these are the customers with height less than the 50th percentile, so less than average on height, we're actually seeing lifetime sales of over $200. And this is the cool thing about being a direct-to-consumer business, that we have all this data about our customers and really can run these analysis. I'm sure I don't have to tell you how big the China market is for products like ours. And all in all, if we're looking at the grow-up milk formula business, this is a $20 billion business a year. And China accounts for about 50% of that market. And it's not only the biggest market, it's also the fastest growing one. And this is why when we are looking at our growth pipeline for the next 18 months or so, one of the biggest growth engines for us will be selling more into China and other Asian territories such as South Korea. In addition to that, we are going to launch some new products that I'm going to speak to you about in a minute. And we're going to add new sales channels. So right now we are doing only direct, but this means we're only playing a part of the game. We are also going to add retail stores and do some marketing to healthcare providers, because we want to make sure that when a family comes into that pediatrician office, they know about Healthy Height and are able to prescribe it, especially now that we have insurance coverage. So I mentioned new products, and we have one product upcoming that is for teenagers, and another product that is for young athletes. And I think this one is especially exciting because now we're actually moving away from just height and growth and developed a new innovative formula to enhance sports performance in children and in teens. Healthy Height is patent registered, as well as our junior formula for children 9 years old and up, and our sports formula is patent pending. Going to run through this slide. Looking at our competitor landscape, our biggest competitor in the US would be Pediasure by Abbott Nutrition. This is a brand that's been around for a very long time now, and they have a very long ingredients list that many parents are not very thrilled about giving to their children. So they have inferior ingredients to Healthy Height and inferior clinical data, and still they're doing over $300 million a year in sales in the US alone. So we are coming with a better product to a really huge market. Our team is comprised of business executives and medical experts. Our upcoming chairman is Brian Liedman, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He's one of the founders of Reza and has a lot of experience with different companies listed in the ASX. I myself, I'm originally a lawyer, corporate attorney. I'm also a mother of a not too tall of a boy, which was one of the things that excited me about this company. We also have some marketing experts in the US who really know how to sell consumer products to the American market. This is our proposed capital structure for the listing. So we just finalized our seed round, which was heavily oversubscribed, and we are heading towards a listing in August or September. So that's it for me. I think I really made it for the 10 minutes, David.
You're on a great presentation. Thank you very much. Can I ask a question? Why the ASX? What has drawn you to this market?
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, we identified China and Asia as one of our biggest markets, and this is where we knew we want to grow. And actually, when we just started, we thought about possibly establishing a company in China or in Asia, but we then decided to do it in Australia as a gateway to Asia. And by the way, the product that we're selling into China right now, we're producing it in the US, but we are also sending it before to Australia or New Zealand to be packaged and then shipped to China. So really, we're looking at Australia as kind of a gateway to Asia.
And in terms of price point, how relative are you to competitors, albeit there aren't any direct competitors that I can see?
Yeah, so our product is premium, and it's a bit more pricey than the competition. All of our ingredients are non-GMO, natural product, clinically tested. So we are charging a bit of a premium, but not so much so about 25% more.
How important is it, and this is probably more a statement than a question, but how important is it to come to the ASX? And I suspect it's why your seed round was so oversubscribed, but to come to the ASX with such a strong technology build already there and having a great sales and revenue history in place, but a clear blue sky opportunity with China?
Yeah, so I think that the fact that we have this clinical data and clinical proof behind us is really what enables us to achieve these great goals without investing like crazy amounts in marketing or anything like that, because we really have the clinical basis and the possibility to write claims on our product. I think it is very important to come to the ASX when the company has already been established to some extent.
And look, you may not want to share it, but there is a question here regarding margins. Do you have any insight into what your margins look like?
Yes, so our margins are very strong, and this is partially also because we are direct-to-consumer business. So if we're looking at our reports, our gross margins are about 60%.
Congratulations. Well, we look forward to you going through the process of listing on the ASX, and we'll clearly follow you closely as you list the company onto the ASX. So we wish you every success. Liron, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Now we turn our attention to two ASX-listed companies to hear the significant developments those companies have made in recent months. Our first presenter is Matt Littleoe, CEO of Neuroscientific Biopharmaceuticals, ASX code NSB. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. And it's a pleasure to present Neuroscientific to you all this afternoon. We'll quickly go to the disclaimer slide, if that's all right, for those that, for lawyer types, and then into the corporate overview. For those who are not familiar with this, we listed on the ASX in July 2018, raising $6 million in IPO, which allowed us, gave us full funding for our lead candidate through to the end of phase 1. But we also have a pipeline of potential therapeutic candidates that are closely related to our main candidate. And we've been able to, in the last few months in a volatile market, maintain a fairly good price, near IPO price. And of note is our main investor and founding investor in Macrae Investments, who the Clough family private investment vehicle, and the Clough family more closely associated in the past with Clough Engineering. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Well, we're a drug development company based in Perth, Western Australia. We've got an advanced preclinical drug candidate that we're hoping to get into phase 1 by the end of this year. We've formed strong strategic partnerships with contract research organisations which we can point to for actual achievements in the industry, and they're very good at what they do. Closely aligned ourselves with those guys. We have a validated business model and strategy in that we're generating data to support the development of our product, so it's an attractive asset to out-license to big pharma or established biotechnology companies, and we have an experienced board and management team to do that. Next slide, please. And there's some familiar names from the previous company here, but Brian Liebman and Anton Uberov are well known in the biotech industry over here. We also have Steve Quantrill, who is a executive chairman of Macrae Investments, but also has a lot of corporate advisory experience, and myself with direct experience from the pharmaceutical industry. Going into the next slide. So the markets that we currently focus on are Alzheimer's disease and degenerative conditions of the optic nerve. And this is using the one compound, please note. Now, most of you would be familiar with Alzheimer's disease and the lack of treatment options for patients. It accounts for a large proportion of patients that have dementia. And it's a growing problem. In the last 20 years, research has been able to generate very little in the way of effective drugs. The drugs that are currently available and on the market are of limited use and really just treat the symptoms. So a drug like what we're producing, coming to market in the next 5 years or so, there's a lot of space there to play. For optic nerve conditions, that covers a whole range of different diseases. There's many neuropathies that contribute to causing damage to the optic nerve. The optic nerve is what takes the visual images from your eye to your brain for processing. We're currently advanced in glaucoma as the main condition in that indication, and glaucoma, as far as being affected the patient population, is second to only cataracts as the leading cause of blindness. Next slide, please. So the drug, our lead candidate, is called Hampton Beam. It's a novel peptide-based compound that's modelled on a protein that is part of the human innate immune system, and we've hijacked a function of that, and we've used that. It targets a receptor that is expressed on the outside of neuronal cells. So we're a bit different in the way that we actually treat neurodegenerative diseases. We've validated Hampton Beam across a number of preclinical in vitro studies and also in animal studies, and we've repeated those studies to be able to show that it does what it does, and it does it well. And because our drug, it has a novel mode of action, because it targets a receptor on the outside of neurons, that receptor is highly expressed on all neuronal tissues. So that just gives us the option for many different treatment indications that we can look at in using Hampton Beam, as opposed to normal drug development processes where you're creating a compound that targets a process of disease. We're targeting something that is ubiquitously expressed by cells, neuronal cells. And what we do is we stop the decline of the cell and we can regenerate to function again. Going to the next slide, please. So just a bit more information about the evolution of Hampton Beam. The compound that it's modeled on is called metallethionine, and you can look through the literature to find tons of research that have been done over the last 10 years to do with metallethionine. We've copied an active domain of that protein. We've changed it just to change the structure of it slightly. We then formulate it in a compound type called a dendrimer, where we tie 4 of the exact same amino acids together. Traditionally, amino acids have very short half-lives, but our amino acids, our peptides, been put in an dendrimer structure. Sorry. Actually, that creates stability for the product over a 24-hour period, but it also increases the potency because you've got 4 of the exact same target molecule heading towards the receptor. Next slide, please. So if this can be activated, this is an animation to show how a product actually works. What you can see is healthy functioning neurons, and you can see the signal flow down through the axon onto the next cell, representing that flow of information. As those cells become damaged through disease or injury, those signaling processes retract, and the cell goes into a state of decline. Now, what Hampton Beam can do when it's administered, binds to that receptor on the outside of the cells and actually stimulates downstream signaling molecules within the cell to become functional again. It turns on survival mechanisms and also regenerates the cell so that it can function as a normal, healthy signaling cell. Next slide, please. So as far as validating and the data that sits behind Hampton Beam, what you can see here is rates of survival in various types of neuronal cells taken from the cortex, from the hippocampus, and also survival of those cells when treated with Hampton Beam in a specific Alzheimer's disease model. Across the board, we can generate good rates of survival at various doses of Hampton Beam. And next slide, please. But also, we can demonstrate regeneration of the axon to show that the actual cell becomes functional and signaling again. And we've shown that across different cell types as well, neuronal cell types, such as those harvested from the cortex, from the hippocampus. And we've been able to show it in injury models where we've specifically caused retraction of those, of the axons and its signaling processes, and then be able to treat them and get them growing again. Of significant note, recently, well, last year, was that we were able to do that in a spinal cord injury model. If we go to the next slide, in which we actually grew the longest axonal extension that they'd ever seen in their assay. And that also used an existing drug as a positive control. And we were twice as good as that existing drug in that particular model. We also had markers to make sure that we could measure that those axonal and extensions were actually functional signaling processes. I'll go into the next slide. And this data that we put out earlier this year is another unique way that we've used Hampton Beam. This is in a multiple sclerosis model where we want to look at the effect of the drug on myelin. Now, myelin is a sheath that sits around an axon and is important to maintaining signal flow of that axon. In diseases such as multiple sclerosis, you have the breakdown in that myelin sheath, and then you have dysfunction of the signaling processes of the nerve cells. Through the treatment of Hampton Beam, we were able to stimulate the proliferation of the population of the cells that contribute to those myelin, to creating myelin in a process called remyelination. All across the dose range, pretty much all our doses were of high significance in that particular model. Going into the next slide. We've also tested the drug to, of course, to make sure it's a druggable compound, make sure it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It also has a 24-hour profile when injected by subcutaneous injection, which is a direct injection into the system. And as far as Alzheimer's disease, we're able to demonstrate in a large-scale animal trial that we could improve cognition by over 80% in comparison to controls. Next slide, please. Now, as far as ocular data and treating the optic nerve, we based our data on the fact that metallothionein was able to successfully regenerate the axonal, the optic nerve. That data was created out of a transection where they cut the optic nerve in rats, and then through one single injection, we're able to demonstrate regrowth of that optic nerve. If we go to the next slide. The first set of data that we created in looking at our ocular indication, actually specifically using Hampton Beam, involved the ocular tissue penetration of the drug after intravitreal injection, which is the way we have to administer peptide-based compounds into the eye. We were able to show that the product achieves very good penetration at significant concentrations over 3-hour, 6-hour, and 9-hour time points. We stopped at the 9-hour time point because that's what we needed to achieve. But not only could we show good penetration across the tissues that we wanted to achieve penetration, and we actually we went beyond that into the back of the eye. And that's significant because that actually shows that the drug has potential to be reformulated into something such as an eye drop and pass through ocular tissue membranes with the concentration that we need it to have its activity. If we go to the next slide. The next set of data that came out of our ocular program was done in a pig model of glaucoma. And this is quite significant, this data, because the pig model is one of the best models. It closely replicates the human pathology of glaucoma. It has a very severe type of glaucoma. So positive results in this model translate very well to what we would expect to see later on when we start doing clinical development. But we were able to maintain the integrity of the optic nerve, which was shown through using bio-specific markers called neurofilaments and cytoskeleton components. And really what they mean is that structurally we're able to maintain the optic nerve even though it was subject to the processes of increased ocular pressure to cause damage. Not only that, we were able to demonstrate through cytoskeleton components that that nerve actually was able to still function and healthily metabolically still be active. So as far as the activity as a treatment for glaucoma, this is quite significant, just in general, showing how Hampton Beam can actually have a treatment effect on preventing degeneration of the optic nerve. We go to the next slide, please. As far as our development schedule, now we're working with a complex protein and we have had some problems as we've gone along. The thing with drug development is you schedule based on what you know at the time. And as new information is created, you have to change your scheduling. But we are really concentrating on completion of our preclinical safety and toxicology program that will allow us to enter phase 1 clinical trials, which we're targeting to do by the end of this year. We've also got a number of other activities in multiple sclerosis, which we're looking at, an expansion of the previous study, where it's further look at remyelination and the effect that Hampton Beam can have. And then in our ocular program, we're also wrapping up our preclinical safety and tox program and hope to start phase 1 by the end of the year. And also doing some more supporting studies to look at different diseases, involving different diseases that cause that damage to the optic nerve. And next slide. So our strategic partnerships, we contract out our research to global entities that have a proven track record in research or in manufacturing. One of those being the locally done here with the Lions Eye Institute in Perth. We also use Covent's labs in the US to perform our safety and tox studies. And Neuron experts in MD Biosciences do a lot of our preclinical efficacy studies. And as far as partners, we recently signed an agreement with Mitsubishi Corp to use their investee company PeptiStar as a manufacturer of our product, but we also use a globally known manufacturer called LMAC to produce our product too. And the next slide. So as I mentioned before, our business model really is just developing the compound to a certain point where we think it's an attractive target to be taken over, acquired or out-licensed to a big pharmaceutical company. And then they can do the heavy lifting with the late-stage development and clinical trials. The promising part of this compound is it just has the option or the ability to basically the potential to treat so many different types of neurodegenerative diseases. And that will be me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. A great presentation and clearly a field that has global reach and global importance. And importantly for investors, you've got a big news flow coming up as the year progresses. Everyone, particularly in the biotech sector, loves clinical trials and things of that nature. So clearly to be congratulated on where you've got Neuroscientific to date, but exciting times ahead for shareholders as they follow the Neuroscientific story through those clinical trials. We did have a couple of questions, but you've dealt with them very adequately in your timeline. So I think that deals with that. So Matt, a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
As we now move into our last presenter, Jeff Pocock, the Executive Director of Osteopor, ASX code OSX. Jeff will now present. He is our last presenter. I do remind everyone, if you do have any questions, feel free to submit those via the Q&A function. But Jeff, over to you.
Thanks very much, David, and thank you everyone for taking the time to come in. And I'll apologise in advance for the typo on the front page. This is the presentation that was put on ASX in February, and I failed to update the date on the cover page, so apologies for that. But if we can flick past the next slide and don't worry too much about the disclaimer, onto the next one. I'd like to take the opportunity to give you a bit, to give our audience a bit of an overview of Osteopor as a company and the opportunities that we see ahead of us. Osteopor is an Australian/Singaporean, so the technology originally developed out of Singapore and then listed on ASX late last year. And it is a medical device company, and the core of the OsteoCore technology is using 3D printing to create natural bioresorbable scaffolds for regenerative bone healing. So if we're looking at all the different components of what Osteopor is doing, obviously it's a 3D printing biological technology. So we're using 3D printers to create medical devices. The use of 3D printers gives us a number of advantages, both clinical advantages in terms of the sorts of things that we can do with the products, but also a number of manufacturing and economic advantages. But the core of the technology is creating a scaffold for regenerative bone healing. Now, bone is a naturally regenerative tissue. If you break your arm, if you break your leg, the doctors will put bone back together and hold the pieces in place, and then the bone will naturally regrow and create and repair the fracture. So bone is doing what bone wants to regenerate, and this is the core of regenerative medicine. It's the idea that what we're doing is creating an environment for the body to do what it naturally wants to do and is capable of doing. The issue with bone is that bone won't regenerate across a void. So if a piece of bone is taken out or is too badly damaged, maybe through surgery, maybe through trauma, or even in some cases from an infection or cancer, the bone won't be able to regrow across that void. And so this is where bone grafts or permanent implants are sometimes used by surgeons, but the Osteopor scaffold provides an alternative to this, because we can create the scaffold that then will sit in that bone void, but it's entirely porous. And this is where the 3D printing becomes available for us. The product is completely porous, has micro pores all the way through it, microarchitecture that enables the body to use that as a scaffold for regenerative bone healing. And what's really exciting about the technology is the scaffolds are actually bioresorbable. They're made out of a polymer called polycaprolactone, which is widely used medically for dissolvable stitches. It's well understood on its reactions. It's essentially inert in the body, doesn't cause allergens, it doesn't cause any negative reactions. But what it does do over time is it naturally bioresorbs. So once the scaffold has been put in place, that creates the environment for the bones to grow. The bone can grow through the scaffold and replace the removed bone. And at the same time, the scaffold slowly dissolves into the body, leaving just natural, healthy bone behind. And that's really important from a complication rate. One of the real issues with bone surgery is, and the bone grafts and permanent implants, is the risk of complications subsequent to the surgery. Because the scaffold is completely dissolved, we have no foreign material left behind. The patient is just left with natural, healthy bone with much lower complication rates. Now, Osteopor as a company is a lot more advanced. We have got products in the market. We are generating revenue. The products have got FDA clearance. They have got CE mark approval. And just recently, we announced that we had secured TGA approval for the products in Australia as well. They've been used successfully over 30,000 times, and the company is currently generating over $1 million a year in revenue. Our strategy from here is to really build those revenue streams. So having an existing revenue platform to build off is really about building that revenue and targeting new markets on the back of the IPO that was completed last year. We'll flick over to the next slide, please. A quick overview of our corporate structure. We have about 100 million shares on issue. Currently trading very stable around the sort of 50-cent range, so a market capitalization of $50 million. We have cash in the bank. That cash balance is actually also from the December quarter. Apologies, that's actually down to about 2.7. So the company currently has a good cash balance, enough to prosecute, enough to keep going for another year or more. Plus, we have a number of options which over time will potentially generate more capital for the company. But obviously, as the revenue of the business grows, that has a significant impact on the cash burn of the company. It's a very tight structure. As part of the IPO, we acquired the Singaporean technology company that had been the historical developer and commercialization entity. So a significant portion of our shareholders in that top 20 are associated with the acquisition of that Singaporean company. I can move on to the next slide. The quick sort of overview. So the key things about the company, the key things I want the audience to be able to take away from this. One is the fact that these companies are a lot more advanced from a commercial perspective than most sort of sub-$100 million market cap biotechnology, med tech companies. We are generating revenue. We have products in the market. We have a proven need for the products and a proven commercial model that can enable us to monetize that technology. The products have got regulatory clearance. We have patents in place that have been granted. We have a very proven and scalable business model built on the idea of 3D printing as a method of producing these products. We have an excellent team both at board and at management level based out of Singapore with a lot of experience in the medical devices industry. And as a result, we have a real focus on being able to deliver shareholder value and a real pathway to seeing how companies like Osteopor can get successively re-rated by the capital markets to deliver shareholder returns. I can go on to the next slide, please. A quick overview of our management team and our board. Starting at the top, we're really delighted that we had Brett Sandercock, who's the current CFO of ResMed. Obviously a major company in the Australian stock market and the medical device industry. And Brett brings some 15 years of experience at ResMed, not only on the operational side of the building medical devices business, but also obviously very strong relationships into the capital markets here in Australia and globally. Also on the board, Professor Teo is one of the world's leading experts in bioengineering and tissue regeneration. He's the original inventor of the technology. He's a professor of biomechanical engineering at Nanyang Technology University up in Singapore, and the original inventor of the technology, and is still continuing to work with us on the board. Koen Sengo is our CEO. He has over 30 years experience in the medical devices industry, working in large companies and small, and he has been really fundamental to the transition of the company from its early research days into the commercial entity that is at the moment. Also on the board, Stuart Carmichael is an executive at Ventnor Capital here in Perth and was the main driver in securing the company and taking it through to the IPO process and onto ASX. And my background as an executive is really focused on the ASX and the market side of the business. My background has been in technology commercialisation and corporate advisory over 20 years, with a lot of experience working with companies on taking them to ASX and then also being able to deliver value once on that platform. I'll go through to the next slide, please, and just a very quick overview of, we talked about if there are bone voids when bone has been removed, what are the current technologies and the current sort of standard treatments being used. The two main ones are the bone graft or permanent implant. So bone graft is where bone can be harvested generally off the hip or another part of the body and then used to provide a de facto scaffolding and fill it into a void to provide a structure whereby the bone can then start regenerating as well. A number of complications potentially associated with bone grafts, not the least of which is that they don't always work. There is a significant portion of times when the bone that's being inserted doesn't actually create the right scaffold and the body actually just resorbs the bone in there and we have to keep trying again. But also there are a number of risks associated with the harvesting of bone, and you can have what's called comorbidity at that donor site where you can have problems with where the bone is harvested. And also there's associated risks of infection, not only due to the harvesting, but also the subsequent, all of the secondary surgical side. With permanent implants, there's obviously a range of complications associated with those. Permanent implants are usually used for larger bone defects, so skulls and forearms and legs and rib cages and other areas. Obviously, they're non-biodegradable. They stay forever. That's the nature of them being permanent. And the key risk with them is the complication rate. Statistically, there's a 1 in 4 chance of a permanent implant requiring follow-up treatment. And that's compared to the OsteoCore solution where it's been used over 30,000 times with literally single-digit complication rates. We have less than half a dozen complications across 30,000 procedures being done. So the complications with permanent implants, the implant can become loose. It can become the part of the bone where it's fixed to can be damaged as well. The implant itself can be damaged, and alternatively, the more serious complication is actually the risk of infection and having infection that can actually sit in between the permanent implant and the natural bone, and it's very difficult for the body to naturally clear that. So if I can go on to the next slide briefly, and we can talk about the OsteoCore solution and how that compares. So the OsteoCore, our products are highly customizable. We biomimic different bone types, so we can actually create the microporous structure needed to promote bone growth and have that customized to the part of the body that is necessary. The products can also be customized into patient-specific implants for larger defects, and that's a very high margin opportunity for us in the business as well. Unlike a permanent implant, the implants, the scaffolds do dissolve over time, leaving only healthy bone tissue behind. And as a result, that has a massive reduction in the post-surgery complication rates. Compared to the 25% that we see with permanent implants, we're dealing at sub 1%. We're dealing with over 30,000 implants, and as I say, less than half a dozen complications over that time. And also with less complications come less risks of secondary surgeries and associated infections or complications associated with that. So I can go on to the next slide. The OsteoCore technology is unique in the marketplace at the moment. It is the only product in the market that combines both the bioresorbable nature of the scaffold, but also provides this sort of microstructured architecture enabled by 3D printing that enables to provide a really solid environment and a really positive scaffold that the bone can naturally regenerate through. There are other biomimetic structures, but those tend to be permanent implants where there's a certain amount of porosity. The bone can regrow into those structures, but the structure still remains permanently, and there's associated complication risks. There are other bioresorbable products, but they tend to be powders and solid products that don't provide the microarchitecture that really promotes bone regeneration. Moving on to the next slide, the Osteopor business model is one based on being a manufacturer. So because the 3D printing is relatively low capital intensity, it's not expensive to set up and then expand manufacturing facilities using 3D printers. And also there's a significant amount of soft IP. There's a range of granted patents that the company has, but also a significant amount of trade secrets and know-how associated with being able to 3D print these products and actually customize them and make sure that they are everything that they need to be. So our focus is very much on being the manufacturer and then dealing with distributors who then distribute the product into the specific geographies where the company is able to generate sales. It's still a very high margin business, even at wholesale rates. We're currently operating at around an 85% gross margin, even based on wholesale distribution sales prices. So it's a very lucrative part of the market for us to be in. And it means that we don't have to replicate the sales and distribution infrastructures that other organisations have already got in place. From here, move on to the next slide. Our growth strategy is first and foremost about building value through revenue expansion. So at the moment, we're doing around $1 million a year. Now, the current sales profile is very heavily dominated by some of the smaller East Asian markets, Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, where we're generating very significant sales. So the focus for us is to increase our penetration into those markets, but then also to really target the growth opportunities in new geographic markets with the products that already have all the regulatory clearances, all the clinical data necessary, and the demonstrated clinical efficacy required. So we're looking at the US, we're looking at Australia, China, and the European markets for those current areas. After that, we also are looking at expanding the therapeutic breadth of the company. At the moment, the majority of the products are being sold into craniofacial, the skull surgery, and a certain amount into cosmetic operations. But there are significant opportunities for the company in the dental space and also in the orthopedic, in the long bones, forearms, legs, shoulders, ribs, some of those sort of more structural components of the body. Very significant opportunities for the company in that area. And then the real blue sky beyond that is then to take the company out into other tissue types and also other polymers that could potentially enhance rather than just support the natural bone regeneration processes. I'll move to the next slide, please, and we can see the milestones since the IPO and what we have been able to achieve since our listing late last year. And already you can see the growth in revenue that the company is able to achieve, comparing Q3 versus Q4. We floated in September. And so it was really only in Q4 of last year that we started to see the impact of having the capital available behind us to start driving business development in those additional markets. Historically, you can see the growth in the company, and we're starting to see now the opportunity to really build on that 2019 revenue number and really drive revenue significantly from there. It's not only about the short-term revenue targets, however, we are also obviously very much focused on the longer-term revenue and the ability of being able to see a pathway to the company generating revenue way beyond $1 million a year, going beyond calendar 2020 and beyond there. And in that respect, we're really pleased to have achieved a couple of strategic milestones in the course of this year, one of which being securing TGA approval that now opens up the Australian market for us. Late last year, we established a partnership to get us access to the Chinese market through Hainan province and some of the opportunities in the development pilot area of Hainan province. We've had some significant success around the orthopedic procedures, including a gentleman on the Gold Coast late last year that was widely reported in the media, who had 36 centimetres of tibia, that's his main shin bone, entirely removed due to an infection, and the Osteopor product used as a scaffold to regenerate his entire lower leg. That was entirely successful. That patient is now walking without crutches. And some 2 years after the surgery, we've had a really significant success there in the orthopedic market. There have been other successes in Singapore and in Oman, again around shoulders, arms, and lower leg regenerations in the orthopedic space. We're continuing to build the team and also building our manufacturing capability. We currently have a manufacturing facility in Singapore, and we're expanding that at the moment. We will be looking at then further diversifying that manufacturing base over time as required and as that makes sense for us to be able to better service the markets that we can penetrate into. My final slide, just to finish off. Appreciate the timing on trying to do everything in 10 minutes. So please take the time to look at our website or other ASX announcements. But this is a quick sort of summary of where we see the company able to go. We are seeing a number of what we consider, from OsteoCore's perspective, are aspirational peers. The companies that we can see ourselves turning into. And you can see the revenue numbers here. We're really looking to get a company as quickly as possible into those sort of $5 to $10 million US, about $8 to $12 million, $8 to $15 million Aussie revenue targets. And we're seeing at these sort of points that the companies that are in that space and that are generating that sort of revenue have really been very significantly re-rated by the Australian capital markets. We see companies like Avita, companies like Polynovo, and companies like Mesoblast that have really generated significant shareholder value on the back of those sort of revenue targets. So we see a real pathway here for Osteopor. The path has been set by these other companies in terms of what we need to achieve. And as we start achieving these revenue milestones, we see a real opportunity for the company to be revalued accordingly and re-rated by the capital markets. So I'll finish there as David is looking at me and I'm sure has some questions, but thank you very much for your attention and certainly look forward to answering questions and always happy to be contacted by shareholders independently as well.
Jeff, a great presentation and a unique product that is sliding and moving into a very sizable market, as you mentioned, and with some aspirational peers there to look at. Clearly, growth is on the agenda. One question that has come through relates to accessing the Chinese market. Are there any particular approvals or regulatory hurdles that you need to overcome to access that market more fully?
Yes, so the Chinese market's an interesting one. Yes, I mean, we do need to get the full Chinese FDA approval. However, what China is currently doing, and if we look at the amount of effort that the Chinese government is putting into developing Hainan province in southern China as, for want of a better phrase, a bit of a medical tourism hub or a medical destination within China. And so the Chinese government has been extremely supportive on encouraging international companies to use Hainan province as their launching pad. So we have the ability of gaining a provincial approval into China to secure product sales into Hainan province for use in that area, and then using the clinical data that comes out of those procedures as a key part of getting broader China FDA approval. So that's still a process that we go through, but having that beachhead, so to speak, in Hainan province makes it a lot more, it gives us a lot of access to the Chinese market.
And I would assume, maybe rightly or wrongly, that having regulatory approval from another Western market would assist the regulatory environment and the regulatory hurdles in China?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, all of the international regulators tend to piggyback off each other's insights over these sorts of processes. So certainly, having already secured FDA and CE mark and TGA approval, as well as securing, broader Asian market, Korean, Singaporean, and some of those Asian markets, the fact that we have got those sort of global market approvals does help us with Chinese FDA approval, although it is still a process that needs to be done in accordance with the Chinese bureaucracy.
And in terms of competition, you touched on it in one of your slides that there's various alternatives that could be used, but Osteopor clearly believes it has the superior alternative. Is there anything more from a scaffolding point of view that is a competitor, almost direct competitor, or are you unique in that sense?
We're unique as being in the market with this sort of bioresorbable scaffolding. There are others, we're aware of a number of groups around the world working on alternative technologies that are also looking at various bioresorbable products. They're not in the market as yet, and so there's still a significant amount of time risk as well as clinical risk associated with the development of those products. And so there are groups that I'm aware of and that we're aware of that are developing bioresorbable metal implants, bioresorbable ceramic implants, as well as looking at other polymer products. The key for them is, at the moment, we are still very much ahead of the game and leading the market in that respect.
And in terms of the Australian market, getting the FDA approval is clearly a very important milestone, but are you already getting interest from Australian practitioners ahead of the FDA approval being granted?
Well, the TGA approval, I assume. Yes, no, we've had a lot of interest from surgeons, and we've done a number of procedures in Australia, even prior to getting TGA approval. It is possible, it is possible to bring products in for under what's called under various jurisdictions, essentially a named patient exemption. So effectively, if a surgeon is of the view that the technology is the right one, then they can provide an exemption so that the products can be used. So the gentleman on the Gold Coast that we did, that surgery was done over 2 years ago now, back in 2017, well before the TGA was approved. But that was on the basis of the surgeon being aware of the technology and seeing the application and the applicability of that to that particular patient's need and the real lack of alternatives. So yeah, there's certainly been a lot more, and we talked about the orthopedic, haven't talked a lot about the dental markets, where we're seeing a lot of interest from dental groups of the application of the OsteoCore technology into dental surgery, where you can provide significantly enhanced bone regeneration to provide better foundations for dental implants. And so that's another real exciting area, a really exciting area for us, and one that we're seeing a lot of interest from the practitioners in the medical practitioners in the area that really want to see this product come out. And that's not just in Australia, that's actually globally in the dental space.
Final question, accessing new markets, is it an expensive exercise, or given you're a wholesaler, you're relying more on distributors and partners to wear some of the marketing or penetration costs?
Absolutely. Look, our focus is finding the right distributors that have got in this sort of model, it is the responsibility of the distributors to have the direct relationships with the hospitals, with the surgeons, with some of the key opinion leaders. And we support that, and we support that very effectively. But it is very much primarily the distributor's job. And our key role and key activities here have been making sure that we're identifying the right distributors that have got those right relationships to be able to assist us to penetrate the market, and then making sure that we can provide as much as we need to do to support those distributors in their business development activities. So from our perspective, it's not as capital intensive. One of the reasons why we've chosen this manufacturing business model is that's not a capital intensive part of the business. Establishing sort of global or national sales and distribution networks is much more capital intensive and much harder to do as a smaller company with only a relatively finite product range compared to the companies, the distributors that have already established those sort of those networks and that infrastructure.
Jeff, a great presentation. Exciting times ahead for the company. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David.
Well, for all our attendees, that brings a close to our TechKnow Invest Roadshow webinar for today. Thank you for joining in. There was several hundred on the call, so great to have you involved. Thanks to the presenters for providing such great insights into their respective businesses, and everyone associated with TechKnow Invest Roadshow for working so tirelessly behind the scenes to get this event up. We will be back next week, and we'll make sure we keep you informed. If there's any companies you'd like us to showcase, feel free to email those in via the website or via my email address, which most of you would have received. Now remember, do your own research, and where appropriate, seek professional advice prior to making investment decisions. Thank you for watching today. Enjoy the rest of your day.